Yeah, this is definitely of the 3 days. This is the day that I find myself thinking back to a little reflection that I did on pedagogy a number of years ago. The title of the piece was "The Fear of Losing Control," and I'm not exactly certain where this is going to go today. In large part because what we're looking to do over the course of the morning is move from some key ideas that Newman is exploring in Discourse 8 into the question of, okay, how does this apply to what it means to be a Catholic, a university in the Catholic tradition? And in the second session, we're going to be looking very specifically at what does this mean for Seton Hall University and its future? How is this going to be reflected into the future? I'd like to set up a few points just to frame what we're going to discuss, and then I'm going to be asking, as I did yesterday, for reactions to the reading, and we'll just kind of riff on what you got out of Discourse 8. But what I first want to do is to go back to yesterday's reading. We didn't frame this as specifically as I might have, but I wanted to bring back a point that Newman made about educational methods and the university, and he talked about the idea that there are two broad general methods that you find in university education. The one is what he terms philosophical, and it's not what Greg does. It's bigger than that. Sorry, Greg. Whoa. Shots fired early in the morning. So we have and what Newman means by philosophical is that it's a method that arises from general ideas. And the other method that he discusses is useful. And this, he says, is exhaustive upon external and particular matters. Right. So it's clear that Newman has something of a bias for the former over the latter, although he recognizes not only the utility but also the importance and necessity of this approach toward the useful. And he's sort of making a nod at the movement at the time that's de-emphasizing the kind of education that he experienced at Oxford as a young man, and toward professional formation of various sorts. And he's trying to deal with things that some of the tensions and debates that are going on in Ireland as Irish Catholics are trying to think through what it means to have a university of their own. Are they looking for the formation of gentlemen? Are they looking for the formation of tradesmen, professionals, and the like? But there's something else going on in what Newman's trying to articulate, and I don't know that he probably wouldn't have been able to articulate it in the way that I'm going to here, but I want to describe it very briefly. There are not only two methods that he's reflecting in Discourse 5, but he's also implying two worldviews that in his time are posited as at odds with one another. And for those who are my age and older, we remember the tail end well, the two that I'm talking about are the pre-modern worldview, with an emphasis on knowledge or truth received through revelation, and the modern worldview that relies on human reason. Now, my formation as an undergraduate in the 70s was still very much lodged in the questions of the modern worldview and the need to satisfy reason. And I remember, I was I did my master's degree at an evangelical seminary in the late 70s, went to Cambridge, and was doing research in the divinity faculty. We heard rumors about this weird stuff that was going on in the English faculty. Questioning things like reason and historical method, and it just all seemed very silly and not to be paid attention to. And I taught for a year at the University of Alabama, then I tested a monastic vocation for 5 years, and I came out out of that setting in the early 90s and started working with students at St. Louis University in 92, 93, and still was trying to address what I thought were the challenges to faith in the context of my introduction to foundations, introduction to theological foundations, and I realized my students weren't asking that kind of question, those kinds of questions at all, and they didn't seem particularly hostile to faith questions or theological ideas. They just didn't. There seemed to be, yeah, sure, that's your truth. That's great. I'm going to get on with my truth. And so we're dealing here with a postmodern worldview that's very much our reality now, and we're trying to find a way forward. I sort of hinted at that yesterday, and it's something that's reflected in the language and both the explicit and implicit that I hear from my sons and their girlfriends when we talk about deeper matters, as well as my students. So we want to keep this in mind as we're looking at Newman's discourse on the relation of knowledge to religion. I thought that what he reflected on had a kind of cautionary note to it. I don't know. Did any of you? Maybe I'll open the floor here, and just to see what kind of reactions you had to what he was relating in Discourse 8. What stood out for you? I've got a whole plan here in case you're all stymied. But I really would prefer to discuss what's of concern to you. Yes.
I thought the thing that stood out the most is putting out these two ways of looking at ethics and morality, and one is the philosophical way that's based in reason, and then there's the way of faith. But I felt like it was the one piece that I was looking for, and probably maybe I just didn't see it, is that when you talked about the faith way of saying, we look at God like, as God calls us to a certain path, we have to obey Him, almost like you could say, I don't want to say fear, but I think of like what Marianne said yesterday, like you have to be afraid not to obey God. But to me, it's like, I felt like that's true, but there's also like, there's the love piece, which I know Newman talked about elsewhere, but I didn't see it as much in this particular piece.
No, I agree with you. It was one of the things that sort of puzzled me about the piece as I was rereading it for today. Yes.
I was actually kind of taken aback at it wasn't what I anticipated it to be, like from the titles, because I was thinking more, I don't know, he would talk more about the place of religion, like in knowledge, but he mostly just did a treatise on intellectual pride, which is fascinating because I think it's very relevant to today, because I think a lot of people can fall under this category in this postmodern era. But yeah, it wasn't what I was expecting him to say. So yeah.
Can you kind of see how he's trying to deal with this question here, and his concern. He's a man of reason. He's formed to engage at a very high level intellectually, but he's wanting to say, there are limits, and some of them are not just about the intellect, they're about character. Yeah. Yes. And then you.
I'm glad to hear that my perception was validated here. There's a little something missing. And as I was reading this, I'm thinking about, he's talking about knowledge, and I kept thinking, coming to this idea, but what about knowing? And then I realized I'm thinking about my understanding of Lonergan's, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but I'm just very quickly.
I'm an old friend of Bill Shea's, who's a diehard Lonerganian.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
okay, so
passive learning, there's a great deal to it. Yes.
So I'm thinking about how we come to know, and thinking about his transcendental method that really is about being very careful in our reasoning, so that we come to an ethical decision about whatever it is. So, in other words, knowing and thinking, and I'm kind of thinking knowledge, knowing, thinking, not all the same thing. The ultimate end of it is is critical thinking, is moral thinking. It's about coming to an understanding. That was another, knowledge, knowing, thinking, understanding, and the thinking, understanding is what I was not hearing here.
Right.
So that was a piece that I felt was missing.
Sure. And to be fair to Newman, ideally we would have done a couple of weeks and read each discourse and in turn and done a close analysis. But it's helpful to sort of lift something out and sort of pull those threads a bit, because I think that his point about reason and the potential for intellectual pride, and the caution that reason is important but only rightly engaged and rightly oriented from his perspective. Yeah. Yes, and then Greg.
So kind of really pick up on that theme of intellectual pride and moral thinking. I was really struck by his critique where he talks about they're not able to see outside of themselves, right? That this basically there's this conscience, but it's something that is there. It's developed in their intellect. It's not from a lawgiver. It's this idea of the transversing of categories, where I think he had this phrase really just struck me. They call themselves fools, not sinners. Yeah, it's really struck me.
Say that again.
They call themselves fools, not sinners.
Right. Yeah, I was, having spent the last semester teaching our Catholic Studies minors and major in our seminar called Development in the Life of the Church. We used conscience as the theme for the semester, to see Newman in a very different context. Almost 2 decades earlier than the text that he's famous for, when he talks about conscience in the letter to the Duke of Norfolk. And so here he's addressing conscience as a potentially flawed. That really stood out for me. I found myself reflecting on that a great deal. Yeah. Yes.
Just two comments. First, to pick up on Nancy's comment, I also found myself wanting to see more of the connection, or at least the possible connection, between education and faith and morality. But on the other hand, I think as I got to the end of the chapter, I found myself really appreciating his insistence that you don't need to be Aristotle to be a Catholic, right? That you don't need a college degree to be a Catholic,
Right.
Or a person of faith. And I do think there's something really worthwhile in insisting on that. And for me, it actually conditioned this sort of elevated account of sort of education as a refinement that kind of doesn't sound quite right to us today, I think, in a lot of ways, even though I have some preference for it.
Right.
But it sort of conditions it in a really radical way, right? I'm saying all these things about the gentleman and education and the kind of polishing and refining effect, but none of it matters in the grand scheme of things if you're not a good person, and education is not necessarily enough. It may make you a refined person, but not a good person. It doesn't guarantee it.
Can you kind of see how, in the context of the 1850s in Ireland, a deeply uneducated populace and a hierarchy that's very narrowly trained theologically and intellectually. He's saying whatever your hopes may be for this university, it can only carry the faith so far in itself, in its intended objectives. What was the line that there were? I think it was either in the introduction or in that we read, or the Discourse 5. He was talking about how the kind of educated person in England could do with some Hebraizing. Rules are important. Boundaries are important. But he was also talking about the need that the Irish might have of some colonizing, being encouraged to cultivate reason and refinement and these things. So it's kind of an interesting dance that he's doing here, trying to make the point. Yes, Catholic University in Ireland is going to be a great benefit to the Catholics of the island, but don't expect it to make them people. And that's a struggle for us today, isn't it? I think about my own university, Duquesne, which over the course of recent decades has placed a very heavy emphasis on ethics and ethical formation, and some of the discussions around, so we have quite a large gathering of ethicists of one sort or another, not just in the theology department, but in philosophy and in professional schools and the like. And I hear some anguishing about, well, we're doing all of this teaching. Are we producing good people? It's an interesting kind of question to be raising in a university context. And Newman is saying you have to build in other kinds of structures if that's what you're wanting to accomplish. What's happening in the course of instruction can only take it so far.
I think his reflection on reason sort of ties, which is the other thing I just want to mention, ties into that. I think you wrote postmodern on the board, and I know you also agree with me, but I think is the best part
I notice I put it in parentheses because I know that that's another, I don't want to get into that debate.
I think that one of the most helpful aspects of postmodernism is this sort of question about the self-legitimizing activity of reason. Right? Is reason always right? The example I give to my students is, well, your crazy uncle at Thanksgiving, sometimes he's just crazy, sometimes he's really smart and still wrong, right? Like he's selective in his insights, but he makes arguments and he gives evidence for his beliefs. And so just that, I see him in ways anticipating, in some ways a whole school of thought that just asks, like...
I'm thinking of my much beloved crazy uncle.
It's usually
these are retired, absolutely adorable, but sometimes unbelievably wrong.
Right, but there's a certain way in which there's a claim to rationality there, right? They're giving evidence, not just stating opinions, but it's selective and it's biased or limited in some way. And so I think raising these questions are really essential, right? Not everything that goes by the name of reason is necessarily capacious or full of faith.
And I will confess that in my graduate teaching, one of the things that I found very exciting about critical theory in the 90s, as I was trying to incorporate it into the historical method seminar I was teaching to our PhD students in historical theology, was this need to not just, it goes beyond, I was teaching historical method to theologians, trying to help them use that methodology to explore the historical context of ideas that they were wanting to examine. But wanting to also communicate, okay, there is value in deconstructing the historical project because built into some of those assumptions are prejudices, not just within the secular realm, but it's exclusionary of perspectives of faith. We need to know that. We need to know how to use the methodology up to the limits of what we need for our discipline, but never feel embarrassed or abashed about saying, I can't, it's not, permissible within historical methodology for me to talk about providence at work in the world. As a theologian, I can speculate about that, and I can muse about that, and that has value for the work that I do. So in a certain sense, I felt a kind of liberation because I didn't feel, I found myself relaxing, feeling that, okay, theology has a place at the table again. You know, it's wonderful. You know, there was respect among colleagues who, you know, as Newman describes it toward the end of discourse, there's a kind of refined gentlemanliness about the conversation. You know, happy to listen. Isn't that nice? Isn't that very interesting? I've always wondered why people of faith think the way that they do. You know, and you can part friends, but you haven't convinced anyone. And that's an interesting situation that we find ourselves in the academy today, I think. And you know, how do we? Because my own sense is that one of the great challenges of Catholic colleges and universities, I'm speaking for myself right now, my observation, that in the last few decades, one of the things that Catholic studies movement has really sought to address is the retreat of a public space for discussing the tradition in our institutions, and you know, until 2 years ago, my experience has been in theology departments, and I love my colleagues in the discipline and in the field, you know, and I have deep respect for them, but theology has, I think, been forced into a position that's too weighty to bear as standard bearers for the Catholic ethos of Catholic colleges and universities. That bearing that mission is something that belongs to all the disciplines and should permeate all of the programs of the university, and therefore seeking allies across the university is something that Catholic studies as an interdisciplinary project can do, that theology can't do, philosophy can't do alone. It has to be an alliance of those intellectually formed and engaged and committed people, not only to their professions, but also to their sense of who they are as people of faith. Yes, Lisa?
Which leads me to another question, but first I did want to make the comment that crazy relatives tend to really favor conspiracy theories. Just throwing that out there, I'm not sure why that is, but they seem to really
But they have a theory.
Yes.
So Newman says very early on, he makes this statement that right reasoning leads to the Catholic faith. And he never really, as far as I can see, he just kind of throws that out there and tap dances around it and doesn't really come to grips with whether that is actually the case, because that seems to me a little bit of the crux of the matter here when you say, you know, like as theologians you can talk to people in different disciplines and they'll be very nice but not necessarily be convinced or agree
Sure.
with you. And that's kind of the sense that I got from that. Yeah, you can say that, but is it so?
Well, here's where I'll speak as a convert about another convert. You know, there are some things that you come to in your experience of growing into the faith that feel self-evident once you're on the other side of that commitment. And I would say that to some extent Newman is expressing that. You know, there are those who love to quote Newman when he says to be deep in history is to cease being a Protestant. That's more of an autobiographical statement than a statement of fact.
So he's not really saying you can reason your way into faith, which was sort of how I.
Which he did. Again, I think it's an autobiographical statement. Something that he wishes for others, and hopes for others, that they are able to reason in the same way that he did into an experience of faith, a life of faith. This is one of those things that I had very interesting conversations with our undergraduates this semester, because we spent a lot of time talking about Newman's prioritization of conscience. In the letter to the Duke of Norfolk, he has this wonderful line, unforgettable line, conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ. It's such a wonderful line. And it's his way of, it's in a very specific historical circumstance in which one of his former students, William Gladstone, former Prime Minister of England, makes the assertion Catholics can't be good subjects of the monarch because they are beholden to, they are slavishly, intellectually bound to everything that the Pope teaches. And Newman in that line has this nice retort. He says, if I'm asked to toast, make an after dinner toast, I'll toast to the Pope, but to conscience first. And I bring that up to say Newman continued to love and care. He worried about those that he loved, that he left behind in his Anglican experience. But what he talked about very clearly was it was a decision I had to make in conscience. I couldn't do anything else without imperiling my soul. I'm not speaking about others, I'm speaking about myself. And boy, do I recognize that in my own experience of conversion. I can see how grace worked in my life in a way that I couldn't turn away without doing some kind of damage to my interior self. I could see that wasn't true for others. Yes?
It seems there's an interesting paradox here. I think on the one hand, you're saying that Newman's autobiographical dimension is a source of his thinking. But on the other hand, you have Newman who is generating these general ideas, philosophical reflections that would appeal and would, in a sense, cover the experiences and the insights of others. And that's the interesting point. I'm glad you've raised the issue of the autobiographical dimension, because that should not scare us. That he's talking about himself, therefore some of what he says is going to remain irrelevant. But I think it's the link that he makes between the personal insights, the autobiographical richness and the depth, of that experience, and the way he converts that into something that could be general, particular to the general, but in a very convincing way. So he has an interesting prism, and that is the way he uses the prism, through which he is able to see everything. But he's not telling us, experience what I experience, but learn from your own particular autobiography.
Right.
And your autobiography may not be the same like mine, but what matters is the insight in the autobiography. We all have different autobiographies, but the idea is to be attentive to that, so you're able to generate that into some general knowledge or some useful knowledge,
Excellent.
for others.
Yes.
And that's the interesting paradox, is that you can actually depart from the autobiography and then end up somewhere else for others.
Well, Newman, philosophers love to explore Newman's personalism,
Yes.
and it's getting at the point that I think you're making there. He's able to apply his intellect, drawing on resources of scripture, reading, patristic, classical, modern, but as you said, the prism that he uses is through his own deep reflection on himself and his life.
Yes.
He's one of these interesting characters. As someone involved in the retrieval and digitization of his materials, of his manuscripts and letters. You see him going back again and again and again, working through papers from decades earlier, making notes, comments, deleting or creating marginal comments that to qualify or to explain what was going on in his mind at that time. He's constantly, and you could say that in a different type of person, I suppose you could still call him self-absorbed, but it's self-absorbed and it's a self-absorption of a sort that benefits those who really take seriously his writings.
In your view, is this characteristic of the whole condition of converting, that is moving from one state of mind and one state of heart into another?
Yes.
Because you were talking about your own conversion, so I'm curious, is this so characteristic of someone who has the capacity to convert, to move from one
Absolutely.
mode of being into another, through exactly this prism?
Without question,
Yeah.
you've really caught it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you picked up on the point that he was making about a false or corrupted conscience.
Yes.
I could go back and look at the page if we need to, but he has this quote. England has its fault, but I love her still.
Yeah.
And then at the top of the next page, he says, any Catholic would see problems with that. And what he means there is any Irish Catholic can see the problem with that. The cruelty, the lack of regard for conquered peoples, you can go on and on and on and on. That's a conversion. My goodness, the man was a bigot in the late 1820s. The movement that he helped lead, the Oxford movement, had at its core a deep prejudice against Roman Catholics, against emancipation, political emancipation for Catholics, Jews, and dissenting Protestants. What he says in that section, in that passage, reflects a person who's gone through a deep social, cultural, political conversion. So you're right. I think that there is something about benefiting from the life insights of someone who's gone through those kinds of struggles, who's had to restructure his vision of the world because what he had backed himself into no longer fit the reality that he was living. That's, you're talking about resilience, integrity, flexibility in interesting kinds of ways that are quite impressive and offer us a kind of model in our own time as we face major shifts and changes in our own era. I mean, you know, the field that my youngest son graduated in, applied computer science, didn't exist when I was an undergraduate. You know, he's probably going to make a very nice living right out the gate in this new economy. But he's aware of the fact that he's received a useful education and worries about his exposure to and deep engagement in general ideas about the framing of the world, intellectually, socially, politically, culturally, you know, at so many different levels. And it will be interesting to see how he resolves that. Yes, and then.
I just, you know, that phrase that you quoted about that goes with false no caption, underline that because that's something that's so important. And I think it applies so much to America as well. So like American exceptionalism, the idea that you know, our country is so great and right, well, you know, I mean, if we are truly Catholic or even as Christian, we have to acknowledge enormous sins in us. And I think that's part of loving one another. You know?
Right.
So that line is really stuck out.
No, I think that's a very important insight, and one that we have to think very carefully. You know, how do we cultivate that kind of self-awareness in our students? You know, I'm so deeply personally committed to an ironic outlook on life that I struggle in the kind of bifurcated world that we're currently living in the public discourse that we have, that we can't speak with complexity about these matters. And how to do that with our students is something that's really very, very important. Again, one of the things that stood out for me in the seminar, you know, I was working with students with a very particular outlook that in their experience was at odds with much of what they experienced among their peers on a number of specific issues. And one of the things that they struggled with was, how can I in conscience not stand up for what I believe? Over the course of the semester, they began to use the language of compassion, understanding. You know, they knew the language of Pope Francis, of accompaniment, and you know, the question on one particular topic was, how can I accompany someone whose lifestyle I don't agree with, and we found ourselves discussing, you know, what does it mean to be, live our own authentic lives as a witness, and so that when those conversations can be had, you're there and they know that you care about them as persons, not simply as objects to be objected to. You know, those are very hard kinds of conversations, but important ones. And if they're not happening in our classroom or outside of our classroom in our offices or in small group discussions or things of that sort, you know, helping them by modeling what it means to be a Christian witness in a world that really struggles with what the Christian message means. You know, we're not going to communicate that by telling people what it is. We're going to communicate it by our conduct and by our example and by the way that we practice it. Yes.
So kind of riffing a little bit on what was been discussed, I thought was very interesting about this is, I mean, what I find different about the British educational system, you know, both from the primary through the higher education is this kind of obsession with being courteous and gentlemanly and you know, in general, like I personally, with the exception of don't find it very authentic.
Am I a British person, you know?
No, I know. My point there is that there's a lot of like properness and like you know, like courteousness and even when you to the extent when I with many British folks and English in particular that I know where you feel it's not very authentic, at least as an American.
I grew up in the South. Don't talk
well,
about
the South is very polite, but it's pretty clear what's going on there.
No, I didn't say what you said.
But the British in particular, the educational system seems to put in a lot of like good manners into the system, and he's sort of reflecting on that gentlemanly thing. It doesn't mean because you're you know, proper in a sense or you're presentable to which goes with the further issue of the British psyche of the monarchy and the Queen and all that stuff, which interestingly enough, when I was eating breakfast, was in the news.
Of course,
right?
of course,
all
yes.
that kind of stuff. I mean, I have many British friends, by the way.
I'm saying some of you guys went through.
Not really.
I'm really loving
I
watching
would
this.
say that none of my best friends are English or British.
We have known each other a long time, and by the way, you're missing the point that when British people are freezingly polite, that means we don't like you.
I know. But it's the fact that Newman is reflecting on that gentlemanly, like, you know, that thing is it authentically Christian, right? I mean, in the American school system, yeah, we talk about, you know, teaching people to be good citizens, but we don't talk about being good manners in a sense, but we don't talk about that aspect of it. You know, so I think there's sort of an obsession there. I mean, you go to other parts of the European continent, you know, France, and they're very straightforward, even to the point of as they have a reputation of being very rude. Where the Germans are very, very straightforward, especially in the higher education. What they tell you is what they tell you. You know, it's clear. The British, it's always you're kind of like, is he being ironic? Is this the actual situation? You know, and you know, I've seen, I mean, mostly in the science circles where literally a British person will give a talk and then someone will ask them a question and then they'll say something sounds very mean, but in such a polite way that you're not sure how to interpret it. So
I doubt the veracity of your statement. Something like that.
Yeah, right. So I mean, I wonder about that, and then sort of the whole consciousness, I mean, of such pride towards Britishness, or Englishness in Newman's case, and his pride of the Queen. I mean, I have a friend who was knighted by the Queen, and I said, I don't totally get that at all. What's the point of that? You know, and he explained, oh, well, you know, it keeps us, you know, together, gives us identity, and And I'm like, so what? Elect someone. Why do you need a queen? You know. And so there's aspects of that I mean I don't think translate at all from what I was reading to the modern, or at least the American Catholic University that I honestly didn't find anything useful from what Newman was reflecting on. I mean, I appreciated learning about it, thinking about it, because I hadn't thought about it, you know.
Right. Lisa, do you wanna?
I was thinking of the great phrase, God is omniscient.
Right.
I mean,
That pride about the British, the sun never sets on the British Empire, right?
I hate to say it, but I was kind of brought up in that tradition. You know, my
Yeah.
father was extremely tolerant of everybody else. It's not their fault they weren't born.
Right.
Um,
Tolerance, but not really, right?
Yes, great.
I went to grad school with a guy from England who said he could identify within like 2 towns where anyone was from based on their accent.
Yeah.
And where they went to school.
Where they went to school, right?
But with Newman, I feel like I agree, but it's sort of, we talk about refinement, manners versus metal, right? That's probably what you're talking about. On the other hand, we'd all love students who could write better or more clearly, right? So there's a sort of sliding scale of some of these refining skills seem dated or deeply historically conditioned.
But it's not refinement for the aspect of being a better person or being a better accountant or banker or whatever. It's
Right.
just sort of almost like a prideful showing off that I am in the class of a noble person. Versus
I think he's conditioning. He's making that
He's conditioned that way.
relative rather than an absolute sort of goal.
I think he's conditioned that way, and he's realizing, you know, this is, you know, a bunch of hooey. We have to.
Yeah,
am I really a good person?
Okay, yeah, I agree that. I think he's being circumspect and critical about the sort of, certainly the absolute value of it and even the relative value of
Right.
the sort of refining effect. On the other hand, every time I come back to his audience, right, a whole country of first generation college students and speaking to parents who want this for their children, it's easy to critique matters from this side of that
Right.
divide, but to understand the sort of deep, you know, cultural environmental atmospheric moment in which he's speaking it and why this actually would look. And that's, I don't know if this is your read, and I defer to you, but it seems to me he's being gentle on the one hand and sort of acknowledging that desire, right? I think of my answer is, I just need a job.
Right.
I don't need to learn morals, I just need a job. And acknowledging the sort of existential kind of pressure that that's a real response to. But kind of in an indirect way, it seems beginning to show the inadequacy, not the unimportance, but the deep inadequacy of that if we want to talk about like a full, faithful, moral life is going to be a lot more than your son who's farming now becoming a clerk, you know, in the center of town or something.
The pride that hates you.
Yeah, and the danger's on the other side of it, yeah, absolutely.
No, well, I think it's helpful to be drawing on that historical context, but let's think for a moment about our historical context. You know, the moment that we're in right now. You know, we're. I want to come back to this point of clashing worldviews or the semblance of clashing worldviews. I find for many years now in freshman classes that I teach of one sort or another, I try to make the point here that at a Catholic university, all 3 of these worldviews will be encountered, depending on the department, depending on the discipline. And they all have their place. They all have their value. And so systems of knowledge don't have to be exclusive or excluding of one another. In that sense, we can benefit from them while recognizing their limits. You know, I was raised as a fundamentalist Protestant, and certainly in my childhood, I was urged to read the first chapters of Genesis literally, historically and scientifically, and that was something that I had a tremendous struggle to let go of as I moved into my 20s, went to seminary, to an evangelical seminary that took biblical criticism very seriously. But when I came back from my first term, over the dinner table, you know, there had been a book published that fall called Battle for the Bible. Anyone who comes from my background will have some memory of that. And, you know, my father said quite casually, well, of course, Fuller Seminary is no longer a development seminary. Because it was taking critical, historical criticism seriously with Scripture. So finding the appropriate limits of these worldviews and seeing how they can interplay with one another is something that in my own experience has been what I try to cultivate and inculcate in my students. You know, if you're in the sciences, you know, of course the modern worldview is absolutely essential. You know, you've got to take seriously what we can learn and benefit from using human reason, empirical analysis, and all that goes with that to discover and understand better the world that we live in. By all means, we need the check in the 21st century that can come from deconstructive exercises that help us understand some of the underlying deficiencies of the modern worldview and the disciplines that have grown out of that, pre-modern worldview and the assumptions that have been made because of specific points of reference, general principles that are applied, and we can usefully learn from that kind of critique. But if it's only to tear down and not to aid our students in constructing a system of meaning and value for their lives, for the lives of those that are around them, for the society that they live in, for the world that they have to survive in. You know, all of those things are, you know, they're from the very micro to the macro, in the most universal sense. You know, we need to help our students navigate these diverse worldviews that we can't not find engaged in the university that we work in, whatever that university is. But I think particularly for a Catholic university, the value that we have is that this, and I always find myself prefacing with undergraduates, but I'll say it here too. Pre-modern is not a pejorative in my vocabulary. To talk about the a worldview that acknowledges that there are deep and profound truths that come to us, certainly in the Christian tradition, we believe from providence at work in the world, is a deep and powerful truth with a capital T. And that we can apply it and make use of it as within its appropriate limits is wonderful. And we have the freedom to do that in a Catholic university that in other contexts we're constrained from doing. We'll take a break in just a moment, but what comes to my mind in the difference is I remember in my first teaching appointment at the University of Alabama, I taught for the first time in many years a course on the history of Christianity from its origins to the 1500. I could have taught from the Reformation to the modern to the 20th century, but I knew that my classroom was going to be dominated by young people from Protestant background, and I wanted them to have the experience of working in that pre-Reformation period. And so, you know, I trying as best I could to be respectful of the secular character of the university, even in a deeply religious ethos of the American South. You know, I was very much the historian in the classroom, and I would talk about, we did use the New Testament, and for the first month, we read deeply in the Gospels and in the book of Acts. And I remember when we started reading texts from the 2nd and 3rd century, the spokesman, the two guys from the Church of Christ delegation in my class, came to me and challenged me, and they said, we thought this was the history of Christianity to 1500. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, that means Bible. And I said, well, the Bible up through the first century. They said, no, Christianity before 1500, it's the Bible. There's nothing between. And I said, no, there's a lot between. But they kind of warned, and when we got into the 3rd and the 4th century, and we were talking about the heresies that challenged the consensus that we now have in Catholic Christianity, I talked about the Aryan Controversy in particular, and there was a period when the majority of the bishops were Aryan in orientation, and I said, there was the possibility that Arianism could have become the orthodoxy of Christianity moving forward. It didn't happen, but there certainly seemed to be the danger that can happen. And these two guys who were the leaders of the Church of Christ delegation followed me down the hall, and they said, do you really believe that was true, that we could be Arians? And I said, are you asking me as a historian, or are you asking me as a man of faith? And they said, as a man of faith. And I said, of course not. Providence is at work in the world. I felt like I felt constrained about making such pronouncements at a state university in the classroom. I made them in the hallway. I love the fact that I can do that in my Catholic university and speak in those more complex, fluid distinctions between disciplines that I've been formed in. And I think that's one of the great graces of your experience here at Seton Hall, where that kind of open engagement and dialogue can happen. But we're gonna, I think we're going to have others joining us, or at least a few, at 11. So maybe this would be a good time to take a break.
Yeah, take a 15-minute break till 11.
Really happy to be engaged here. Just want to say what a powerful experience this has been for me. I've learned a great deal from interaction with you, so thank you for that. I really do appreciate it. You could probably tell in the last 15 minutes or so of the first session, we were sort of moving gradually toward the question of what it means to be a Catholic university in the 21st century, and the idea of a Catholic university in the 21st century. Because my career, the bulk of my career has been in Catholic settings, Catholic university settings, I'm deeply aware of waves of ambivalence and uncertainty and pushback and criticism. Even in my current university, we're trying to correct the tendency of student ambassadors on our campus as they give tours saying, Yeah, it's a Catholic university, but you never know that. It's not the message that we want to hear. I've had the experience of speaking to groups of Catholic adults, people of influence, who told that story and said, "Explain yourself." I didn't say that. But how do we what do we mean when we call ourselves Catholic universities in this era? What do you mean by that when you say that about Seton Hall? And more to the point, what do you want that to mean in the life of Seton Hall University moving forward? I'd like to frame it around saying I'm aware that good work has been done here for decades in attempting to create space for that kind of ethos. Monsignor Dick Liddy is one of the fathers of the Catholic Studies movement here in America. Going back to the early 90s, and we're deeply grateful for your wisdom and the way in which you participated in making what's now a movement on more than 60 campuses around the.
I didn't know what I was doing.
You were just paying attention to the Holy Spirit. Let's just leave it at that. But it is a great legacy for this university to have, and the presence of a Catholic Studies Center, Catholic Studies Department, this ongoing reflection on how to be a Catholic university in the United States in this time. You have a great resource in these two units of your university. Let me open the floor maybe with a question. How does that impact the nature of units that you come from, the disciplines that you represent? How do you see collaboration across units? Greg hasn't asked me to do this, but I'm going to say it. How does a Catholic Studies Center assist in that work? What might augment what's presently being done? I'm just tossing out a bunch of possible directions that this conversation could go, and I want to hear what you have to say. I'm not here to tell you anything. Dick, you want to get us started?
Well, very interesting. I went to the graduation of my grandnephew yesterday at Red Bank Catholic High School.
Yay.
And it was very interesting. Anyway, I wanted him to go to a Catholic university and wrote letters for him for Boston College, Bridgetown, Notre Dame. But he decided to go to Northeastern, which is where his brother went. My older brother. But the first semester he's going to spend in Rome. I said, oh my gosh, but then I don't know what's going on in Northeastern, but I also know that they have a great campus ministry program.
Sure.
And so the whole relationship, Catholicism, the general culture, and I think he's going to major in data science and some computer science.
Sure.
But anyway, the whole relationship with faith and commitment and the tradition of Catholicism to the general postmodern scientific world, that's an ongoing question that we're all asking. How does it affect concrete people that our young people will run into? Maybe why Northeastern has a program first semester of Rome, I don't know. But anyway, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I gave them a couple of guidebooks.
Sure.
And told them that we went out for an Italian meal yesterday. So anyway, I'm just talking now.
It's an interesting question. At times I've observed students on campuses that aren't Catholic or have any sort of religious affiliation. The intentionality of seeking out, the Newman Center or the chaplaincy, the engagement in that way, something that's self-directed and self-determined. Sometimes it's easier for an undergraduate to do without feeling forced or constrained. And so that's one of the balances that a Catholic university has to maintain. The Evangelical Protestant college that I attended, we had mandatory chapel 5 days a week, or with chapel checkers to make certain that we had seats. And so that's not what I recommend. As devout as I was not very happy about being forced to do that. But how do you draw students into productive engagement in courses, in events, in retreats that are intended to aid them in building that connection between faith and reason, what it means to be a person of faith in intellectual pursuit. These are not easy questions for any institution, especially as diverse as Catholic universities have become over the last decades. I don't think that we're going to return to a time when confessional affiliation is a requirement for being a professor or a participant in employment at Catholic university. I don't think that we want that. But how do we build allies in that vision of what a Catholic university and a Catholic mission and its identity can and should be?
This is something that actually I was going to talk to you personally about. In other words, Newman developed this question in Grammar of Assent.
He does.
Which my teacher, Father Lonergan, read 5 times. Right. You don't read a book 5 times. Listen.
Especially that book.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. It's a tough book.
Yeah.
But it's about this personal dimension, personal element, conversation with everybody. And where is a person at personally in their journey? What Newman talks about it, what are your basic principles? John Monaghan would say, hey, there is an intellectual conversion dimension to this too. So anyway, yeah, the idea of conversations, small groups, seminars, institutes, programs, very important, it seems to me, to get at that personal dimension of the person's own journey. I heard what you had to say before. This was Newman's own journey. He said, I'm being egotistical. And I think in the grammar he says, true modesty is, egoism is true modesty in this kind of thing. So, anyway, that's just.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Are we allowed to dream? So.
Please, yes,
Okay,
that's,
so,
if we're not allowed to dream in this matter, the title for this session is about the future.
so I mean, I just want to say that I've been here since 2006, and I've seen such a positive shift in my time here around the way, right, we're definitely Catholic, we're still Catholic. Oh, thank you.
It's still there.
Yeah, exactly. No, dream, but I know you're about to say.
We love your lecture from Tuesday.
Who knew that the grass grew so quickly?
You know, I think we have an excellent opportunity to, I think the Chronicle read a really good article that part of the exhaustion is institutional exhaustion, right? And so my dean always reminds us about self-care when she speaks to the faculty, and I think that's super important, but that's still like an individual response. And I would love us to take a more Catholic approach to our institutional way of being about the world, right? So one thing we know, there's huge differences in who does emotional labor on campus, that are, based on positionality, right? So Black female faculty are going to be doing so much more mentoring than the older white men, right? Because students, they're not as likely to come to them, right? They don't have good vibes. So, but because our Catholic faith says that mentoring should be so important and valued, I said I'm running a tenure. Like we don't have the incentive structures, I don't think are as well aligned to our Catholic identity as they could be. And I'm not saying that I want colleagues that are just gonna come and chat all day and not do research, but that would be mad too. But I think that we should be leading this revolution, so. We did a seminar on academic bullying last night, we had 87 people be there and putting their experiences in the chat and talking about things. Like I think I would prefer if Seton Hall was a place that has a good rep, because we don't tolerate academic bullying. And we don't want a competitive nature, right? Part of what I like about my job is I work in a cooperative department.
Right.
My colleague getting a publication is great, it doesn't mean I'm crappy. But I think that we have, but there is like a level at which, you talked about this, right? There's a level at which we have that. And I mean, the other thing I love is that line from Nostra Aetate, which our students read in Journey, therefore we were pro this far into the mind of Christ, any form of discrimination against each other. And I like, that's our fourth strategic goal, like we're taking steps, and we've got, like you said in class, I'm like, you don't want to read about racism, shouldn't have come to a Catholic institution, sorry. It's like, don't blame me, blame these Jesus people. So those are the sort of, like, that's where, which is easy to say as a full professor, right? It's so easy to sit back
And I was going to make that point. I mean, the Catholic Studies Department that was founded this year, first full year that we've had, we're a department of full professors. That's the great news. And so we're able to think in terms of flexibility of time. When we heard from campus ministries, when we sought advice about how to engage students in more meaningful ways, they said be here after 4:30. And that's it's one thing for a full professor. I got my second my renewal letter for the endowed chair that I hold without much in the way of a incisive sort of challenging examination. I'd like to think that I've been doing a good job, but I didn't fear for my job. I recognize that I remember the anxiety as an assistant professor. I remember the worries as an associate professor, needing to make that next step for the sake of my family and the income that it could bring. Building in incentive structures is an important thing. If we're wanting to have that affective engagement with our students. Which seems to be what you're implying. Yeah. That it's not simply about the intellectual, it's not simply about the programmatic. And I will admit that part of what's been so thrilling about this first year of Catholic Studies at Duquesne has been the dinner that we threw for interested students in October, and the Advent party that we had, and I could go through a list of other things that we did, partly because we have a very talented program manager who's just super efficient and has become this person that we can say, oh, we're going to have a fish fry 2 weeks from now, and we're going to invite the whole university to come, and it happens. And we have hundreds of people there, and that you have to have structures in place. You have to have gifted facilitators of that kind of thing for those kind of impactful events to happen. I saw, yes, Lisa?
Yeah, sort of following on some of the stuff that Marianne said, I think one of the really valuable things about being at Catholic University is to be able to have these kinds of discussions, of having events, of having things like Praxis. But one of the big issues, I mean, even for us who are tenured faculty, is finding time. We all know we're overloaded. But particularly the huge number of incredibly poorly paid adjuncts who we rely on for teaching very many of our courses, many of whom teach not only here. I know some of your adjuncts in English, but they teach 3 different places. How can we possibly expect them to be engaged and engage with students to the extent that we're talking about when they're working 60-hour weeks, rushing from place to place for the pittance that we pay our adjuncts? So I think that's a big problem. We complain enough about not having enough time to engage with students out of well, in our case, out of the library, but I think the extent to which we, I hate to use the word exploit, but I think that's what we do, our adjuncts as cheap labor, to teach, in many cases, our most important courses, our foundational first year courses. So I think that's a real problem. And the other thing which I mentioned before, and it's this tension between, the aspiration to consider ourselves a research university and really push and reward research, which almost demoralizes teaching.
Right.
I've known people who've not got tenure who are wonderful teachers because they can't push out enough publications. And I think we need to redress that balance between, yes, we want to do research, but teaching is surely our fundamental responsibility.
Yes. And one would hope our joy.
Yes.
Yes.
I was distracted by that remark. I think just evaluation of teaching is something we need too, a better way of measuring that so that people who really invest in their teaching are rewarded for it. But I was going to say that as a political institution, the Catholic Church, like other political groups, sometimes leads with no. And I see it on one of my roles as co-chairing our DEI committee is we often hear the, no, you can't say this, no, we can't do this crosses some sort of line. And I think a philosophical point to make is that it'll lead with a positive message more. And one way that might happen is having our various, explicitly Catholic bodies, such as the Catholic Studies program and so on, do missionary work on campus of going from program to program, department to department. What are you doing in English to engage the Catholic mission? How can we help you do that? How can we help facilitate a conversation with your majors, changes to your programs? I think we need more of that, and I know it's a pull on people who don't have much time either, but that kind of internal mission and leading with a positive message to counteract what you described on campus, where Catholic bucks.
Right.
Not like that, not too much, not,
Right.
it's just not a good sell for anybody.
No, well, and I simply want to reinforce the point that you're making. One of the things that's been a real, part of what makes it strange for me to be talking about, Catholic studies as though I'm an expert. I've been involved in this work all of 2.5 years. Dick has been doing it for decades. Greg has his own background in these matters. But but I can say with some confidence that what made for a positive reception for Catholic studies at Duquesne, and this may sound challenging to some folks, I hope it sounds like an opportunity. I have not encountered a Catholic institution that doesn't have a cohort of alums, benefactors, who get jazzed about Catholic studies and are willing to fund at significant levels. And with that comes the opportunity to project a positive message, whether that's collaborating with other units in creating events, projecting just that kind of positive energy. Where Catholic Studies at Duquesne is largely putting together a national book launch for Shannon D. Williams' book, Subversive Habits, which is a very sharp and in some ways painful look at racism in women's religious orders in the 20th century. And it's going to be an occasion for there to be some discussion, frank accounting for that shocking gap between what they were intended to be and how they engaged the African American community. And it was kind of brought to us by one of our associate provosts who said, the Sisters of St. Joseph at Baden are wanting to do this book event on campus, and can you help them find a location? Well, we not only did that, we organized the reception, we organized the space for the talk, and only simply by being receptive to a request as a unit, we've stumbled into something that has a national and international profile. I mean, the book is making a major impact, and we've got religious women leaders from all over the country coming to Duquesne for that weekend, and it's generated a lot of positive energy. For us as a department, it means that we're able to reach out. We're being seen by the religious congregations in the area as a can-do kind of constructive engagement on a difficult topic that certainly among some sectors of Catholics would look like we're behaving in a partisan, political way by acknowledging the problem of racism in the life of recent history. And I would argue, there's still current problems for Black Catholics. So, but it has felt like we're projecting a positive message that we're not afraid to be engaged in hard topics.
Yeah, and not afraid to take a position as a Catholic position.
Right. Yes.
I was just gonna say, I'll be there virtually,
Excellent, excellent.
but because I want to acknowledge in doing that, the sense of, and I think this adds, and this is gonna be a strand that runs through all those. It's about truth telling. Her book, I mean, just as a symbolic of that, it's about telling the truth. Nostra Aetate, in a sense, acknowledges the truth. And there are, in a sense, many other areas in which the church could be truth makers, truth tellers. And that's not limited to the academic arena.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate you making that point. I will admit that when the provost asked me to lead this initiative, I walked out of his office having two kinds of things rattling around in my head. My first reaction was, oh God, what a time to found the Catholic Studies Initiative on our campus. And my other reaction was, wow, what a time to start a Catholic Studies Initiative on our campus. You know, one was dread because, you know, of this concern that there are so many burdens laid justly at the door of the church at the moment. But the realization that the church has lived through some very bad times of its own making and out of the making of its opponents. And really what our work has to be about right now is helping young Catholics who are inspired by the message of the gospel to find a constructive way forward to be Catholics authentically in the world, without minimizing the sins of the past, without sidestepping those issues, but recognizing the value of the tradition in our culture, in our time right now.
I'll compliment what you just said by saying one word, one concept. It's empowerment. It's in Matthew, when the disciples are then set out.
Right.
We all need to be empowered. So I think there's a focus of respect is that the church, the value system, becomes the empowerment mechanism.
Yes. Yes.
So when you were in the provost office, similarly, I made it perfectly clear to you that you're now licensed as you leave his office.
Right.
If you go forward, there should have been no questions, so to speak.
Well, I will admit that having been told that this was a presidential initiative, I expressed my reservations. I said, I know faculty. I am enough of a faculty member to know that anything that's self-described as top down is destined for hard times. And he said, well, now that I stumbled into major funding for this department for the first few years, and he said, well, now you've got what you need. Now you can make it a grassroots movement. And in a certain sense, I was explaining to Pat, that's exactly what happened, because we didn't go in for grand announcements by top administrators that went out to the press. Instead, I made appointments with close to 40 faculty around the university and had private conversations with their offices about what was being intended and seeking advice. How will this impact your unit? How can we be of assistance to you? How can we make this a vital part of the life of the university? And that made a huge difference. Yes?
I just want to build off onto what Jonathan Forrest said. The church has an enormous, teaching of social justice. And a lot of times, I think students think of, as Catholic, we can't do this, we can't have it, like the Calvin thing. But there, as Forrest was just saying, just giving the students the power to speak the truth and to act on social justice issues is so important. And we brought, a few texts into the core in the last several years, with Oscar Romero, Pope Francis's Laudato Si, Martin Luther King Jr.'s Mountaintop speech, and Brian Massingale's excerpt about race. And with those 4 texts, just dealing with those texts in class, you can have such rich and fruitful discussions with students that speak to these issues. And I ask my students in their final exam to say what text this is important to. Which text would you most recommend we should read right now? So many of them said Romero, and I think one of the second ones would be Pope Francis's text, because they're dealing with these issues and truth at recognize exactly what they're doing and not skirting around the issues. And that's what students, everybody, but especially young people, need, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, Pat?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I think this relates to a number of things that have been said, but as we're talking about, what should a Catholic university be? I would say always, including into the future, is it's a Catholic university should be a place where Christianity lives, and by that that doesn't have to mean that it's it's overtly certainly not imposed on every facet of the university, but is this a place where faculty, students, staff can have an encounter with Christianity, and I'd quote Benedict XVI or like Luigi Giussani, who founded Communion of Liberation, people like this always emphasize Christianity is not just an idea. It's not just an ethical system. Even though that's good that we're doing theology and Catholic studies and engaging in an intellectual way, but I've heard, Ken, in your own examples, I know Nancy would speak, I think, the presence of the San Egidio community here, certainly the work of campus ministry, we have a seminary here, there are all these different places where Christianity can be encountered, where people can come into contact with Christianity as a way of life, that also ultimately traces back to this person of Jesus Christ, who we believe to be God incarnate. Some of us here have been working on this new committee on the Catholic intellectual tradition, I think, and as we've worked to sort of articulate what that Catholic intellectual tradition is, one of the things I like that we landed on, a lot of credit to Greg, is that when we talk about the intellectual tradition, that tradition doesn't exist but for the incarnation, for the person of Jesus Christ. So, I think, somehow, somewhere in different areas of the university, if that isn't present, if Christianity is not, if there, and I wrestle a little bit with the comment that you made earlier about, we're probably, past the time we can't be insisting on, that you have to be a Catholic to teach here. And yet the same, and I recognize, the prudence in that, but also, if there aren't actual Christians here, and if people don't encounter Christianity in some way, then is this really a Catholic university anymore? And I would say, and that we're certainly well on the slippery slope of this ceasing to be a Catholic university, even in as Harvard and so many of the Ivy Leagues have gone over time.
Sure.
So it's just that, somehow, some way, Christianity needs to be alive and not imposed, but there's Jesus' approach was come and see.
Sure.
Is there an invitation? Are there moments, occasions where students, faculty, staff can kind of catch a glimpse of that, and if they so choose, to go deeper into it?
Well, I'm gonna say something that may be a little controversial for some in the room, but my response to that is, each unit has to be authentic to itself.
Yeah.
And so I recognize that to some extent what we've experienced over recent decades are Catholic universities seeking to be the best that they can be and bring in the most talented people that they can bring in. And just, at times, and it's been more impactful in certain universities than in others. I don't know what the situation is here at Seton Hall, so I'm not speaking about Seton Hall at the moment. But one of the great challenges for Catholic studies can be that it can start up. I'm thinking of 2 or 3 universities specifically right now. They can have a deep desire to be interdisciplinary, drawing on the resources of the university. but discover that they have no dialogue partners about the Catholic tradition and their discipline. And so how can you be interdisciplinary when there are whole units that have no vision for the Catholic mission of the university? And so one of the things that can be done, and I'm saying this for a certain sector of people in this room, one of the things that can be done is to empower the interdisciplinarity of Catholic studies to help leaven those fields with lines in various disciplines, with people who are recruited specifically to engage in a constructive way those disciplines explicitly with the Catholic intellectual tradition or other dimensions of Catholic social teaching. Now, people who have deep commitments to do that, and that kind of interdisciplinarity can then be a source of rejuvenation.
I think that's what I heard Jonathan saying earlier on.
Yeah.
I promised a lot.
But you know, I have to say that at Duquesne we're quite blessed with colleagues in a wide range of departments who have been passionate about the spirit and Catholic mission of Duquesne, Duquesne's as an institution. So you know, we didn't have to create a course entitled Sociology of Catholicism. It existed in the sociology department. We just cross-list. There are courses in communication, in political science, in history, in psychology. You know, I could go down the list of willing, enthusiastic partners whose courses have already an intentional engagement with the Catholic tradition, but students had difficulty in their own efforts to bring that together to find it. And so Catholic Studies offered a space where those kinds of courses can be gathered together under a Cath number, Cath prefix, or under the disciplinary number, but one that we can direct students towards. Greg?
I'm interested in this conversation, but maybe at a different level, especially with Newman in mind. A lot of these have focused, I think, rightly on how the university could do more to make space for its Catholic identity. But how ought the sort of Catholic identity of the university sort of lead to a commitment, I'm thinking in particular to the liberal arts, right? As historically, but I think more than just historically, I think in principle as kind of essential supports for the life of faith and the sort of culture and atmosphere that makes, certainly not imposes, right? The faith can only be proposed, never imposed. But that raises the likelihood that the life of faith would appear meaningful to students.
You know, that's an interesting point that you raise, because I you know, and I can't take any credit for this. It's a person who's a specialist in communication and the director of our honors college who came up with this tagline for Catholic Studies at Duquesne. We talk quite emphatically about the value of all the programs and all the schools around the university, and we frame it as, you know, your primary major is about the what and the how of your future. Catholic Studies is about the why and the for whom of your life. I don't know that students necessarily, especially in our social media age and, you know, the shrinkage of attention spans, struggle to understand exactly the value of humanities formation or or engagement with texts or things like that. But they do get this idea of, okay, what's the meaning of my life? What's the why of my future? What am I intended to be as a person? How can I impact society that I struggle to understand? These kinds of questions are ones that students don't on the surface necessarily connect with Catholic studies, but I think useful ways of orienting their thinking toward those big questions, those big ideas that Newman talks about in his philosophical method of education, is what Catholic studies is, at least in our context, is seeking to do. Yes?
So I might be off base here, but I kept going as I was reading the chapter to this one section at the beginning on page 138. And I think that answers your question, Greg, where he says, when I speak of revealed truth, it is scarcely necessary to say that I'm not referring to the main articles and prominent points of faith as contained in the creed. And then he goes on, and at the bottom he says that I have to compare and contrast not the doctrinal, but the moral and social teaching of philosophy on one hand and Catholicism on the other. And I think that kind of captures what we try to do here.
Yeah.
Is do both.
Did you read my notes?
No, I didn't.
Those were passages that I was going to bring up if someone else didn't. So thank you.
Yeah, I kept going back to it as I was reading this chapter, that's what I got out of that chapter, that we're doing that. Not forcing Catholicism on people, but letting them see what the truth is between the two.
Right.
And I think Seton Hall is a safe place for a lot of these students, that they can talk about what's on their mind as young adults.
Great, that's wonderful. That's good to hear it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes?
You told me yesterday I was allowed to talk twice. I talked about the institutional culture, but I would like us to do some really individualized, and Amy and I share a love of a good quiz that categorizes you, right? So this, I think for me, back in the olden days when we didn't do a good job articulating our Catholic mission, I would have never known that I was raised in modernity. I feel like I've heard something like
Depends which department they're from.
words I learned after coming here.
Right.
I was raised very much in this, right? This idea that you had faith, you needed to keep that quiet. And it was through Collegium, which is faculty development for Catholic faculty, that I learned that was not true. And it was quite a perk. And so, I think that it would be great if we could really articulate all of the ways. I totally hear what you're saying, Patrick. I don't want us to never have people that are Christian around here, but I think a lot of people don't realize that they're Catholic because they don't understand, right? It would be like a quiz. It's like, it turns out your research, you have an incredibly, Catholic consistent perspective. Let me help you articulate that. Because I think a sense of belonging here is so important for our colleagues who don't identify as people of Christian or Catholic faith, or that, were hurt by their faith, and that it's like we're hiding our light under a bushel barrel. I think that's in the Bible somewhere. And so
That's a good image.
that's right. That's what we do. People, and that's what Collegium.
I've come across that. It's something I've read.
I know Catholics can read the Bible, but that's
Only after
We
courtship.
just know it.
So that is where I think that we have some, then people sort of feel like individually, like you care about what they're contributing. And
Sure.
I think that there is a real, speaking of, a sense of feeling like you have purpose and meaning around here and that you're contributing and that you don't have to. I have a colleague that loves that Benedictine phrase, listen with the ear of the heart. He's like, this was so, once I learned that, I was like, aha, that is exactly what I want my classroom to be like.
Right.
And they sure don't teach you that at PhD program class.
No, I didn't learn it. I learned it in my novitiate in the monastery. Sure, and it's one of my favorite phrases as well. Yes, great.
I'm just gonna invite Anthony, Inez, and John all have some thoughts online.
Okay.
So I think if they unmute, they'll be able to speak into the room, so.
Okay.
Inez, do you wanna go first? Do you wanna unmute and see if we can hear you?
I give Anthony actually go.
You want to, okay. Inez, where are you speaking from right now in the world?
I am in Northern Macedonia.
Connection's pretty good.
Next weekend, we would like to listen to an Orthodox, Muslim, Bektashi, you tell me world.
All right, Anthony, did you want to jump in? You unmute?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thanks, Ken, for giving us so much food for thought these past 3 days. Thank you. Now, so my Ines, John Radwin, and I had sort of a chat exchange, and we were kicking around this issue of a dialectical attitude. That should that be sort of a starting point for a Catholic university, that the Catholic intellectual tradition is in ongoing dialogue and encounter with these other perspectives. But would Newman say that doesn't go far enough? That's sort of a too thin a conception of what a Catholic university should be. So I
would say that it's a good place to start, for sure. It seems to me that you know, most young people, even young people who are intensely devout, are aware that they stand in some distinction from the culture around them, and part of the challenge I think that we face in our introductory courses, and I find I've been doing this for I guess decades now, is trying to help my students appreciate the fact that the questions that they have about the world in which they live are real questions, and they need to be asked. And it's not a lack of faith or a losing of faith to ask those questions. I don't know how many here have ever encountered Friedrich von Hugel's Three Elements of Religion. I've written a little book called The Three Elements of Belief that's an attempt to kind of recast those three elements in a language that's more accessible than von Hugel's. Love von Hugel, he's dense writer. But the three elements of religion are about the child's way, the youth's way, the mature person's way. And he doesn't see those as stages, although he uses the language of development, human development. But the point that he's making here is, authority, reason, mysticism, and he sees those as being elements that in a person fully engaged in their faith experiences a dynamic engagement between those three. But students rarely arrive with that balance. I would say never. And so acknowledging that youthful desire to understand why, their curiosity about difference, the need to ask those big questions that feel scary because if they ask them, it may suggest to themselves and possibly to those who are authorities in their lives at home or elsewhere, that somehow they're letting go of the faith of their childhood, and for them to be able to realize that they can do that kind of dynamic questioning as an opportunity for growth and maturity into the faith. That's something that we can certainly do, and it doesn't have to be in a theology class. It doesn't have to be in a philosophy class. It can be in literature. It can be in social sciences. It can be in the sciences. there are many different ways in which those of us who are committed to the Catholic mission can help students live with and grow into comfort with the need to ask authentic and real questions in their lives. And those questions are not going to be the same. They're not going to be my questions necessarily. They're not going to be the questions of the student next to them. But to help them develop a sense of comfort with that process is something that I think is a profoundly important part of what we do at a Catholic university.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Inez? Inez, you want to say anything?
Another topic that we were discussing actually was the structure of Catholic Studies department at Duquesne. I know that because we have talked about Catholic Studies program and about our courses, but John was asking the question, how come this department is made up only of full professors? So John, John, are you there? Anyway, I said that you are going to kind of hire professors from you hire professors maybe from other departments who are people that were engaged in the Catholic intellectual tradition, but also you are going to hire new professors because we have a different. Actually, we are suffering from structure at Seton Hall University a lot. So if you would like to comment on that.
Sure.
John, is this what your question was, right?
Yes, it is, and thank you for asking it instead of me.
Well, thank you both for the question. The answer is we didn't seek to create a department of full professors. It happened to be the people who coalesced into conversation partners about the creation of the unit, and they became, in one instance, a full line that was transferred into Catholic Studies. In I think 2 other instances, primary appointments with secondary appointments in their original departments, philosophy or theology, and one who's coming into the department sometime next year, who has an administrative appointment and will be a non-teaching member of the department, but a full appointment. So we didn't set out to be this senior department with full professors only, but I'm 67. My target date for retirement is 75, and so even as in our first year as a department, I'm thinking about what needs to happen, because we it's a great thing to start with mature people who are able to devote a lot of energy into the startup that is requiring out of classroom and out of office hours time to promote and nurture the growth of the department. But the downside is that we're all full professors, and we need to start thinking about the future of the department and how to keep that energy and vitality real and ongoing. We're looking to benefactors to help us in the first instance hire into our department non-tenure track appointments, at least initially, that are targeted to the engagement with different disciplines, whether it's history or literature, but always in collaboration with and in dialogue with those disciplinary units to make certain that they appreciate that what we're doing is not trying to duplicate what they're doing, but augment, finding experts who are not necessarily, whose expertise is not necessarily reflected in the disciplinary unit. I do know of one instance of a major Catholic university, and I know this from their former president, who used Catholic studies at his institution as a way of seeking to rebalance the Catholic mission. He described to me in a private conversation how he had a social science unit come to him shortly after he became president of his university, and they were very emphatic and very clear, kind of brutal from the way he described it. They didn't want any of this religion stuff. They were a scientific department, and they didn't want anything to do with anyone messing around with this religion stuff. It was a department that really had ceased to have a real connection with the Catholic mission of the university. And he listened politely, was gracious, and called the director of the Catholic Studies unit at the university and said, "How would you like to have a line in this field?" And they recruited someone for that field that had an engagement with and a sympathy for the Catholic character of the university. That I don't necessarily say that that's the ideal way of dealing with that kind of circumstance, but it does speak to what is a challenge in certain on certain campuses, where there aren't willing collaborators with a Catholic Studies program of whatever sort or definition that it has, and it creates an opportunity to rebalance and create a different kind of dialogue on campus between disciplines, disciplinary units. Lisa?
So related to that, do you do a lot of co-taught courses? And if so, how do you do that? Because that's something we really struggle with here. 3 of us were just co-teaching a course, but there was actually no mechanism to officially do that. Is there a lot of that, and how do you handle it?
I'm not taught at a university that doesn't struggle with the administrative question of co-teaching and how those credits are split, and which department gets which amount of credit and all that kind of thing. That's something that ultimately, in dialogue with administrators, needs to happen.
That's a real barrier.
It is a real barrier. It absolutely is a barrier to interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary teaching. One of the things that I, maybe because I've always been interdisciplinary in my approach to my research, my first, I'm trained both as a theologian and as a historian, so I come to my work naturally with diverse methodologies. Second book that I published, I had to develop some expertise in literary criticism because I was writing a monograph-length introduction to a critical edition of a collection of sayings.
And I know you have library skills.
Yes, I had to develop that as well for a later project. But the point that I'm making here is, we can retool, and some of the joy of the work that we do is the possibility of developing the tools necessary at an undergraduate level. I think some of us get deterred from trying to do things interdisciplinarily because we feel that we have to have the graduate level expertise and training to teach in that area. But to apply some of those skills from other disciplines into a kind of enriched experience for students so that they can see that there are connections and overlap. The course that I teach on in our Essential Questions series for our new core is entitled Whose Humanity Matters. I start the first couple of weeks dealing with that topic using some of the tools of sociology and to some extent psychology to talk about what the challenges are. We move on to historical analyses in 2 units, and it's halfway through the course we shift into a biblical and systematic theological approach to the question. And I find that students respond well to that. In the course that I teach on the 10 Commandments, there's biblical criticism that we engage in. We do some film study, film analysis, because it's a film class, using Kieślowski's Decalogue cycle. And there's historical contextualization. I suspect that if you think about what you do, you're already teaching interdisciplinarily to some extent. And for students to see that exemplified, I think is a healthy thing.
You do learn so much from working with somebody like
Oh, absolutely.
in our Mission Mentors project, which we haven't really talked about. I work with Anthony Nader and Youssef here, who are in completely different disciplines from mine, and it's incredibly fruitful having discussions from these different perspectives and different areas of expertise.
Sure.
You know, I would love to be able to see us do more of that.
Right, right. And who knows, Catholic studies may be a way of facilitating that.
Well, we do support the Mission Mentors program, right?
Good, yes.
I've been kind of thinking as we've been discussing, sort of, since you bring up a lot of, you always talk, I mean, as a historian, I guess, it's in your instinct.
It's in my genes.
Yeah, it's in your genes, right? But the origin of the Catholic universities, the colleges in America came as a reaction to effectively what you started the first day on persecution of the Catholics that they couldn't go to there were these guys on the corner with their 0.1% in North Carolina.
Right.
And it's sort of they had to do their own thing in a sense. They couldn't go to the Princetons or the Harvards, as was discussed earlier.
Sure.
And thinking, kind of fast forwarding, I mean, I'm probably one of the last of that generation where as a Catholic, you go to Catholic schools, you go to, grammar schools, you go to Sunday school, you do catechism, and then you go to, high school, and then, go to a college that's Catholic. That of course is not there.
My sons would say that they're the last.
Yeah. but they're not going to Catholic universities, right? As far as I understand.
Both of them
did.
Yeah,
Okay.
all 3 of them did actually.
But it's become sort of like that was sort of the Catholic way, right? Mm-hmm. In America at least, and that's kind of disappearing. I mean, you at least I'm not sure in Pittsburgh, but in this area, the public schools, were like, well, you have an option, go to a private, like mostly Catholic school, or go to a public high school or something like that, you pick that. Now, of course, you have options of charter schools, which I like to say they're Catholic schools where they literally have scrubbed God out of them, and everything's the same as far as the discipline, and we care about you, and we get together in the mornings, and we do quasi prayers and all that kind of stuff. Not really prayers, but we're community, that kind of thing, and that's become sort of the where most Catholics would okay, well, like, go for free or pay, $25,000 a year to go to Seton Hall prep, So I kind of look at that moment and kind of what's happening and how putting my feet in shoes of a current high school student, why would I want to go to a Catholic college or university on that, and I think of you were talking about the worldviews. I mean, you talked about, the traditional pre-modern revelation, Catholic university, and then sort of the faith and reason, aspect of the modern and the postmodern, deconstructing all that. And we're sort of in a different era now where it's more of a disruption of institutions. I mean, it's I was thinking of yesterday as I was walking to the parking lot. I mean, I counted 7 Teslas And there was a cluster of 4, which are administrators and faculty parking area of Teslas. And I'm like, well, wow, there's a bunch of people here, my colleagues that are environmentally conscious, I guess.
Right.
They're not driving gasoline cars or electric cars, but they're disrupting that economy, that aspect of it. But of course, to get electricity, you gotta burn stuff too. So I mean, are you really doing anything? And or
You put solar panels on your roof.
right, yeah, but it still takes very nasty minerals and materials to make that stuff. And then taxi drivers, which was considered a decent job, a blue collar job. I mean, now it's Uber. So everybody now is becoming a gig person, right? You graduate from whatever university, and literally you become a taxi driver.
Sure.
So you have a lot of that kind of happening in the world that I think as universities, both Catholic and public and whatever, how do we react to that? I mean, why should I go to college? I mean, what's the point? I mean, I can go online, take Google credits, and get a pretty decent job and get paid more than Jonathan as an administrator or something like that.
Well, that's not hard.
But I mean, so I think that's where I thinking of what we've been discussing the last 3 days. We're in the context of this disruptive world where tear down the government, tear down the university, tear down everything, and rebuild something better.
Well,
Is that a question?
It's a question of what's the point of college?
I wrote the verse here.
Yeah, well, here's the thing that comes to my mind.
What's the place of the Catholic University in this context?
Well, your litany brought to my mind a point that I think was being made earlier. Much of the justice questions, the questions about stewardship of the world, what it means to be a human person in a global society, what is my responsibility to the common good.
Is buying a Tesla a good thing?
Right, but in many ways, what I think we're struggling, we sometimes don't recognize. I think it was you that was talking earlier about we undersell what we do, because much of what you're talking about sounds like secular justice discourse.
Yeah, but
it's deracinated from the best of the Christian tradition.
Yeah, but it is affecting the so I mean in the Catholic. I'm just talking about locally.
Sure.
I mean, I drive from Newark to here on South Orange, and they're always building new things. I'm like, oh, what's that? Oh, it's a new Christian church.
Right.
In the Catholic church, there's this beautiful one on the corner there. It was sold to a Korean Christian group.
Right.
And a lot of the 200 or so Catholic churches in the Archdiocese of Newark are being sold off because there's just not enough Catholics. And so that's the context of what, as a Catholic studies, almost is like what is being a Catholic in America in the year 2020 all about? I mean, do I need to go to Duquesne's or Seton Hall to truly be Catholic, or should the my local parish have a longer catechism through the rest of your life?
Right. Absolutely.
Can everyone just wave goodbye to Inez and say happy birthday in that camera?
Happy
She's
birthday!
Thank you so much, guys. Good to see you.
Let me use the example of an engagement that I've had over the last 18 months, and I promise you this is not an advertisement for a project that I'm involved in. Well, maybe. But 18 months ago, I started a conversation with the trustees of the Pontifical Irish College in Rome. They had if you followed anything about the Irish Catholic Church, you know that there's been an implosion of vocations to the priesthood in Ireland. I mean, absolute collapse, and much of that has to do with the failure of truth-telling about the past injustices that occurred in the Irish context. And as a result, churches are virtually empty in Ireland right now. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that. You know, I have memories of being in Ireland in 1982, and every church on Sunday was packed for 5 different masses with families and all that sort of thing. So, you know, major trauma and in turn questioning of, you know, institutional direction. And so I heard that the Irish College was likely to be closed as a house of formation. And so 18 months ago, I started a conversation with the rector of the Pontifical Irish College about the possibility of the college being a place where Catholic studies programs here in the United States could send students to Rome for a semester or for a year for studies, a kind of Catholic studies abroad thing. The conversations have been very fruitful and have morphed over that period. One of the things that I've really noticed from the beginning of the conversations was that the bishops were just, we've got this albatross in Rome, you know, it's just sucking money. We have no one to send to it. We just need to sell it. You know, it's 4 blocks from the Colosseum, and it's 2 blocks
We've
from.
stayed there, we've stayed there, yeah.
Yeah, so you know. You know, you just sort of, you know, what? You're going to sell this property in the middle of Rome?
Wow.
That's how exhausted the bishops were. They just wanted to get rid of it. And so it started a conversation, and you know, they began to think, okay, well maybe somehow, you know, and this is language that I was proposing, that the Irish Church still had a missionary role to play, even passively, by allowing Americans to come there to live at the college. The conversation has moved from kind of an absentee landlord arrangement to now they're very, very clear. This is a partnership. We want active involvement in this. And oh, by the way, what's in it for the Irish Church? And the reaction that the rector is facilitating is, okay, this has been a place for priestly formation for a century at that location since 1920s. We don't have priestly candidates, but we do have young people in Ireland who are often isolated from one another, but who yearn to be people of faith and yearn to have that nurture. Let's create a space in Rome where university students and beyond, or you know, pre-university, can come for periods of study and in a place where it's not weird to say, I believe what the Catholic Church teaches. I find there to be meaning and purpose making in the life of the church, and so we're now at a point where they're contemplating not just Americans coming, American lay students coming for periods of study, but Irish students coming. And we're now talking about the possibility of tossing out this challenge to American bishops and to UK bishops and and other English language countries around the world. The possibility of bringing young people together in a formative collegiate environment where they can study at the pontifical universities, Newman's model, of the university providing experts for that level of instruction, the college being a place where community is built, where students can grow and deepen in their appreciation for the faith, and develop relationships and friendships that can help grow their faith as individuals, but also be the seeds for the planting of new experiences of community when they go back to their individual lives.
So this is just an observation, not a criticism.
Sure.
But so you see in your context, I mean, I don't quite get it here at Seton Hall, but you see Catholic studies as the formation of lay people, and then sort of the seminary, like we have here on campus, as a formation of religious folks, because I mean that seems to bifurcate the church.
No.
In a sense. I mean, it's what happened to Princeton or Harvard or
sure.
The lays. The lay became, there were more, of course, and then that divided, as Pat was saying, the Princeton Seminary and Princeton University.
Sure.
Is that where we're Catholics in America, Catholic universities in America are going?
It needn't be.
Would that be Seton Hall in 20 years?
And this is why I see Catholic studies as being a very useful leavening place in a Catholic university. It's a locus for explicit discussion about the Catholic tradition.
For Catholics and everyone.
For everyone.
For everyone.
So
that's the heart where the all religions, regardless of Christian, whatever, Muslim, or
I would see it as a place where where everyone is welcome.
And the seminary doesn't stay.
No, not at all.
Okay.
I see the opportunity to be very fluid. We tend to think we're all tempted from the historic bifurcation in the life of the church to think lay people, clerics, or religious.
Yeah.
So you've got those divisions. What if Catholic studies on Seton Hall's campus, in the intentional building of community in a place like the Irish College in Rome, or wherever, is a place where lay students can deepen and mature into their authentic spiritual self in an atmosphere where intellectual life is taken seriously and their questions are respected and not dismissed or marginalized or seen as challenges to authority. Those are, there was a wonderful moment in a conversation with the Archbishops of Ireland recently, in which John Boyle of University of St. Thomas was saying to them, we've been talking about the possibilities of young people being able to think without apology about an attraction to priesthood or religious life. And John Boyle said, "Oh, forget about that." He said, "Let's talk about forming lay people who are going to live in sacramental marriages and raise the next generation of priests and religious." It was a beautiful moment. You could see the archbishops going, "Oh, I hadn't thought about the importance of nurturing lay people of all kinds of vocations, including marriage." It was a great moment. You could kind of see the enlargement of their own sense of what their role and their potential, the potential of their work could be. You've got the advantage on this campus having a seminary on site. You have the advantage of having Catholic studies as a presence on campus. and growing and nurturing that, finding benefactors who will fund it enthusiastically so that Catholic studies can be a welcomed partner by any unit at this university, I think is a really exciting thing. Yes?
And two other things that I was thinking of when Jose said that. I mean, maybe it's the role of the university now, this university, to be providing that kind of Catholic component that most people can't afford anymore, or it doesn't exist because those schools are closing, to the public schools. There's some sort of relationship where those who are interested, those families who are interested can participate, and we provide faculty or engagement or programming of some sort in outreach to the schools, and then it ends up with students for us as well, in hopefully down the line. But it's a mission kind of driven service that we could run because of those schools are disappearing.
Absolutely. That's something that we're already investigating at Duquesne as well. And it's kind of interesting how, the university had at one point that kind of engagement with high schools. And for whatever reasons that
Well, they're closing down.
It actually was a high school.
Yeah, so I mean, the point is, there are historic ways in which we've engaged the community. And I guess because we're a brand new program and we're just, throwing all sorts of things against the wall to see what sticks, we're looking at all kinds of possibilities. But that, exactly what you're describing is something that could be a very fruitful way for the university to meaningfully live out its Catholic mission.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So, but I mean, just like you have an 8th grade education, when you're a Catholic, you do your confirmation and you're 13, that's it. I'm Catholic, I'm done. I don't need to do anything else. I mean, so what about high school? How do we bridge them to here, Jonathan?
So that's the other thing I was going to say is the attitude about buying the Tesla, right, is a very American kind of capitalist or consumerist vibe, right? That I'm being environmentalist by buying this correct thing, and I'm being a socially activist person by buying the Starbucks free trade coffee instead of. Well, that's buying the right thing can make a slight difference, but that's not the solution to everything. Is right. Buying is not the only meaningful form of action, and so I think bridging that has to be starting in 8th grade in high school, and that's what convinces students that they're not coming here to just buy what they can get from Google, but an experience that is more transformational.
Get free from Google, actually.
Right, or to get for free from Google and then work for them.
Well, you could do it through youth ministries in the parishes too. They're desperate for help.
A little bit.
Greg, sorry. I know that we're coming to the bottom of the hour.
But one, we're hopefully going to bring, we've been in discussion for 2 months with our archdiocese to bring upwards of 450 high school and middle school theology and science teachers here. Hopefully Bethany Hall, if I ever get a call back. But for like a full day of training and breakout sessions on teaching science and religion, right? So to your point, and again, I'm sure I will eventually sell that to Alyssa. It's like, hey, this is a great opportunity, but it actually should be something that's coming out of the ethos of just what we are locally in the archdiocese here in Newark, next door, kind of engaging with people, because they're people in our neighborhood more than anything else, around the sort of issues we have people here who can speak meaningfully to and about. But I was just at another university facilitating a similar discussion like this. An Ex Corde, the church document from the 90s on Catholic education, was sort of the text we were using. And in rereading it, I was struck, John Paul II ends with this focus on what he calls pastoral theology and ministry, which is really what today we would mean by campus ministry. And just thinking about, it's not on our list, but the sort of co-curricular experiences of Seton Hall, especially for students, but increasingly, I think, to Marianne's point, that engage faculty and staff too, around a sort of integrated development, in the case of faculty and staff, that supports sort of a whole life and not just sort of research and teaching, but also especially for our students. How do we think about maybe CAPS and campus ministry and service in a sort of interdependent, kind of expansive and interrelated sense that sort of is as important, maybe not as distinct. I mean, the university has to teach, it's not their Georgetown University, but is certainly right underneath that in terms of giving people an education that has depth and root and staying power beyond their 4 years here in a couple classes.
Say one sentence to
Sure.
But in a cancel culture that we're in, having access to the Eucharist and reconciliation is an act of, I think, beautiful rebellion and liberation that I think is part of Jose's conflict, right? I think our students need, and our faculty need those for whom that's an accessible option.
And with proper nurturing to understand how.
But it sounds terrible.
Right. And I'm hearing a psychology professor making an appeal for the healthful benefits of
Forgiveness
this
is kind of nice, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
I wanted to just mention this, in the scriptures it tells us that without vision, people shall surely perish. I think Greg mentioned the example of raising hundreds of teachers on campus. So that if a vision starts from the inside going out, it's one-sided to begin with. If we're looking to expand anything, we should be asking or developing, casting a net outside to the fish to say, what do you think should be out? So I think that gives us a two-way vision. So I wanted to bring that to everyone. So we need community advisory boards, fundamentally, to advise us, the experts.
Excellent. Excellent.
Is that a wrap?
Well, I don't want to abuse anybody's time.
That would be a first.
In academia, not.
In academia. I'm glad for that clarification.
Is that payback for the opening salary?
Yes.
But I-
Final payback.
Yeah, but I do want to say again, what I said at the beginning, what a privilege it's been to be here and be in dialogue with you. I'm taking back, and my department, my university community will benefit from what I've heard here. So I just want to say thank you for that, and how much I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you for a few days.
Thank you.
We're very
Thank you.